Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we've got two more beers coming at you today that are sourced from Tavour, and we've got two different brewers but the same style. The very first beer we're doing today is from a brewer I've never tried before. This is Modern Times Beer, based out of San Diego, California. This is called Booming Rollers. It's a double dry hopped IPA, clocking in at 6.8% ABV. They do give a lot more information about it as well. So it says 50 IBUs, and it's brewed with a blend of Citra, Citra Cryo, Centennial, and Motica hops. This beer is also noted as vegan. So this is now the second vegan beer that I will have tried, and it is the second review in a row to feature a vegan beer. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing what a vegan IPA is about. Moving on to the second beer, if you've seen a lot of our reviews, you may already have an idea of where we're going with this one, just based on the label art. It is indeed Anchorage Brewing Company. This is the Demon Boy. It's a hazy IPA, clocking in at 6.4% ABV, and this is brewed exclusively with Lotus hops, which is a newer hop that's kind of come out, and evidently it is supposed to impart kind of these creamy and fruity qualities at the same time, so almost like a creamsicle. So I'm very much looking forward to trying this one out and seeing what that's about. So nonetheless, I can't wait to jump in. So we're going to do exactly that, starting with Modern Times Beer. This is Booming Rollers, the double dry hopped IPA, clocking in at 6.8% ABV. Okay, so jumping right into the first beer of today's IPA review, we have got Modern Times Beer Booming Rollers. This is a double dry hopped IPA, clocking in at 6.8% ABV. They are based out of San Diego, California. This one's brewed with a blend of Citra, Citra Cryo, Centennial, and Motuca or Motica. I'm honestly not sure the pronunciation, so I'm probably going to pronounce it differently every time. It's Motueka. So I presume it's one of those two pronunciations, maybe Motica, Motuca, I'm not really sure, but nonetheless, that's the other hop in it. This one clocks in with 50 IBUs, they do tell you that, and it's also noted that the beer is vegan. So for the second review in a row, and only the second ever I've had, we've got another vegan beer on the table, and this one in the form of an IPA. So first, in terms of label art, you can see it's very, very plain. Just says Modern Times Beer, Booming Rollers. And it does make a note that this is entirely an employee-owned brewing outfit, which is awesome. So the other thing you maybe can or cannot tell, this is a very, very tall can indeed. I've got one of my largest glasses I've got here that is a good all-purpose glass, works particularly well for IPAs, and I'm hoping that I will come close to getting this whole beer in this very, very large glass. So without further ado, let's get this cracked gently. Okay, lovely. And let's get this one poured right in the glass. Okay, that is a lovely looking IPA. It is looking very, very much like what I picture in my head when I think IPA. This slightly golden, bright yellow color, and yeah, this is a very tall can. Even with this really huge glass, I'm not going to get the whole thing in there, but that's okay. All right, visually hold it up. Yeah, that's a lovely beer. This is a clear beer. It's not a hazy, and it's very bright yellow with slight orange hue. This is kind of the textbook color I picture in my head when I think of an IPA. In terms of carbonation, it formed a really nice head, but I'm not seeing a ton of crazy activity once that's been formed. Very, very tiny, small champagne-like bubbles slowly moving up from the bottom. That's about it. It did form a lush, creamy head on top. It looks great. Let's give it a sniff. Ooh. Oh, that smells really nice. That smells really nice. That smells very hoppy, very fresh. You get a nice blend of three of what I consider to be the four main hop aromas that kind of come through. You get a little citrusy, you get a little earthy, and you get a little kind of pine resinous. The other category that I go to explain how hops smell is tropical fruit. I'm not getting that in this. I'm getting pine, and I'm getting citrus, and I'm getting earthy. So that's kind of the main characteristics that are coming out. and it smells just absolutely lovely. In terms of balance, it's kind of a dominant mix, and in fact, actually, there is a fifth categorization that I use to describe hops, and I only just picked up on it here. There is a little hint of floral as well. Yeah, it really does smell nice. I would say overall, it's more dominant citrus with a slight floral back, and then earthy behind that, and just a twinge of pine and kind of resiny. But it smells very nice. It smells very hoppy, and it smells very, very fresh. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Oh, that's lovely. That's a very nice IPA. Okay, so in terms of what you smell and how that translates into the beer in the glass in the form of flavor, really what comes through dominant in terms of classic hop characteristic flavor profiles, it's got this nice kind of subtle earthiness to it, with just a twinge of funkiness. Think Fuggle, but with a slight funk twinge. That's more or less how it comes across to me. So it's a classic kind of earthy bitter, dominant, just a little twinge of funk. Not dissimilar to how Mosaic, if it's used with a heavy hand, can kind of impart this slight funkiness to the beer. In tandem with that, there's a little hint of citrus. I would say it's more grapefruit than anything. And in terms of flavor, that's really the two main flavors that are coming through to me. Certainly the aroma smelled great and hoppy and had a whole bunch of different aromas, but in terms of actual hop characteristic flavor that came through, that's pretty much it. It's citrus and it's earthy. Yeah, really is. In terms of kind of the pine twinge that I got on the back end of the aroma, I'm not getting any of that. I'm not really getting any floral flavor per se either. Which you do often get. It's not coming through in this one. At the start, what seems like it may be a little bit of a pine resinous flavor coming through really ends up just being this slight funkiness. It's not resinous at all. It doesn't remind me of those classic West Coast style hops, even though Citra and Citra Cryo, those are big ones, as is Centennial as a nice West Coast style IPA. But it's just about the balance and the volume and how they hop the beer that kind of dictates the final product. So we know they double dry hopped it. That's why it had all these big, pungent, bold, fresh, delicious hop aromas. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to make its way into the beer. That's all based on the boil and how long they leave it in, what stage in the boiling process to extract those alphas into the beer. But I can say it's very nice. Overall, this is not a hugely pungent IPA in terms of bitters. It's nice. I would say it's average, maybe even on the low end of average, but it tastes very good. It tastes very, very fresh, and even though these are dominantly high alpha acid content hops, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to extract them into the base beer. So alpha acid isn't necessarily everything in terms of bitter and hop pungency in terms of the bittering agent. It's really, this is more a story of big, fresh, bright, bold flavors, just delicious hop aromas, and it's got those in spades. Very, very nice. I'm going to jump in now and start to explore this body and mouthfeel. Body, it's on the fence between medium and medium heavy, so pretty much exactly where I'd expect for 6.8% ABV. Mouthfeel, it's got some thickness to it, which pairs well and feels appropriate considering the way that the body comes across. And it does get a good bit creamy if you start to really agitate it around the palate, but it's not like rolling around a cream ale or a stout that's been pulled off of a tap. But it does have a natural bit of thickness to it, which feels really nice. It feels more robust, really, than the ABV would let on. So it has real presence when it's in the mouth. In terms of the way that the flavors develop, I'm going to have to jump back in because there's a lot that's happening. But I wanted to describe where it pops in and kind of where it finishes out. You first get it in your mouth and swallow, the first thing that hits you is citrus. It's kind of a juicy burst of citrus. It's very much grapefruit. Then behind that, you get that earthy back to it and just the subtlest hint of what maybe at first starts to come off as a pine resiny quality, but then it turns more into like just this underlying funkiness. And it's not funk like Brettanomyces funk, and it's not like over-hopped funk. It's just got this slight twinge of funk to pair with the earthy and to pair with the astringency of the grapefruit kind of citrus quality, which frankly, I think is very, very well balanced. Doing all the dry hopping really made the aroma come out in terms of just having big, fresh kind of quality about it. Even though it wasn't that pungent, you had to get down in it. Once you did, you were rewarded with just an absolutely delicious aroma. And the same is true in terms of the flavor. It's not the biggest, most intense flavor, but what you do get is very well balanced and it's absolutely delicious. In terms of the way that this finishes, it finishes wet. It's not a dry finish to the beer at all. And it's got a reasonably long finish on it. I'm still getting these flavors lingering, albeit they're very, very subtle. It's not top tier, but it's certainly above average. Overall, I think this is a very, very well done beer, and it's a nice IPA that I think would appeal to a broader array of tastes and preferences in terms of IPAs. It's not so big and intense and pungent that it would be off-putting to people that don't have high tolerances. So I think overall they did a very, very good job crafting a nice IPA that many, many, many people can enjoy. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's review. That is Anchorage Brewing Company's The Demon Boy. That's a hazy IPA clocking in at 6.4% ABV. Okay, now jumping into the second beer of today's Tavour IPA review, we have got Anchorage Brewing Company's The Demon Boy. This is a hazy IPA clocking in at 6.4% ABV, brewed with lotus hops, which is a hop variety I've only seen out in a couple different beers, and evidently it's supposed to accentuate these kind of creamsicle flavors, so fruit plus kind of creamy vanilla-like. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what these hops are about. Anchorage Brewing Company is of course based out of Anchorage, Alaska. And if you haven't caught any of our prior reviews where we've done Anchorage Brewing beers, if you do not live in the state of Alaska, the only way you can get your hands on their beers is through Tavour. And you definitely want to do that. They are winning awards left and right, and rightfully so. I have yet to have a weak beer by Anchorage, and I'm looking forward to jumping into today's. So we're going to do just that. Starting with their label art, theirs are always just awesome. It's hard to describe what this looks like. A lion inside of a crocodile, inside of a skull. I don't know. I suppose that's the Demon Boy in his regalia, but that's what it looks like. It's very awesome. They have really neat label art on their cans to be certain. But without further ado, let's get this cracked. Gently. Gently being the operative word. There we go. All right, and poured right in the glass. Okay. So this is a lighter looking IPA for sure. It looks very nice. Visually, that is pretty much spot on the color I think of in my head when I think of an IPA. That's what I expect to see. Granted, they do run the gamut. This is very much what I picture in my head. No question about it. So, got that poured in. Turn that label around for you to enjoy. And holding this up, I would say it looks like it has a little bit of haze to it, but it's not super, super occluded. In terms of carbonation, it's quite active. There's no question about that. It's very, very active, and it looks predominantly to be rather kind of medium-sized bubbles. So while it did form a nice, lush, creamy head here on top, I'm not sure how well that's going to hold because it's so active coming up from the bottom. It has a tendency to make the head collapse when it happens in the beer. But nonetheless, let's give it a sniff. Oh yeah. Wow. It smells very nice. It smells very fruity. It smells almost like a mix of mango and I don't know what else it reminds me of. Mango and papaya. It's got this tropical fruit smell about it. And in tandem with the tropical fruit aromas, I'm getting a little bit of a funky vibe to it, a little bit of a funky vibe and a little bit of earthy and the slightest suggestion of a kind of piney resinous note in terms of aroma. But it smells very nice. It's not super pungent, but once you get up over the glass, it really does smell quite nice. And it looks great and the head is still holding, so let's just jump right in and give this a sip. Oh, that's very nice. That's a nice beer. Okay. So when you first get it in your mouth, what you smell, what comes through in the aroma, does kind of sort of translate directly into the flavor as well. It's got this slight tropical fruit kind of edge to it. And wow, this has a nice long finish. And I tell you, it gets increasingly more complex the longer you just let it do its thing on the end of the sip. I'm going to have to go in for multiple sips to explain to you what's happening. So my initial thought, aside from the aroma more or less making a statement on the flavor profile side, you do get this nice kind of creamy quality to it. So I don't know if that's how they brewed this hazy. You get that with a lot of hazies, or if that is indeed all related to this lotus hop, but it's very nice. It's very enjoyable. I'm going to jump back in for body and mouthfeel, start to explore these flavors a little more because it's very, very complex. The body is medium heavy. It feels much more robust than a 6.4%, 6.4 ABV would let on. Mouthfeel, it's got real thickness to it. I wouldn't call it viscous. That puts me in mind of syrupy. It's not syrupy, but it's thick. It's got a natural thickness to it. And I can assure you, if you agitate it around the palate, it gets very, very creamy, very silky would be the way that I would describe it. It's very nice. It's got real presence in the mouth when it sits on the palate. In terms of balance, I'm liking how well the hop is the star of this beer and the subtlety of the malt bill is doing its job. You do get a little malt backbone, but the hop is very much front and center, and the malt bill they chose is not even encroaching on overshadowing the hop at all. It's a nice light malt bill, and I think that's a great choice in an IPA. Not to say you can't have a great hop-intensive IPA with deeper roasted malts, but the lighter, in my experience, really does help. They tend to not overpower the hop, and that's not happening here. It's beautifully balanced. I'm going to jump in for another sip because I think I've just about picked apart everything that's happening with the flavor. Get it in your mouth. What comes through and the aroma does come through and translate to an extent into the flavor. But the first thing that I noticed was a mix of maybe tangerine or blood orange and grapefruit. Almost more like red ruby grapefruit rind. It's got this astringency to it, this more bitter twinge to it. And that does pair with this underlying sense of creaminess. I wouldn't call it vanilla-like, it's not. And I wouldn't call it a sweetness either, but there's this sense of creaminess that goes along with what I'm experiencing. Again, I don't know if that's related to the hop or just the way they brewed this beer, but it's definitely present. You can't miss it. And it mixes with that kind of citrus side that jumps out at you. And it does kind of put you in mind of, say, a creamsicle, maybe an orange or a mix of an orange and a ruby red grapefruit creamsicle. I could see where they're coming from with that descriptor. But don't get me wrong, it's not like a mix of sweet vanilla and citrus fruit making a creamsicle. It's not like that. Another thing that I noticed is I'm picking up hints of what does taste like blueberries. So This hop seems to possess some qualities similar to Mosaic. That's a very common descriptor with Mosaic hops. They're very well known for that, imparting both blueberry aroma and flavors underneath, and I'm getting that. And frankly, it's very, very enjoyable with how it mixes underneath this strong upfront citrus side and then this creaminess. And in conjunction with that, there's this really nice upfront bitterness and underlying bitterness from what I described as like the grapefruit rind. It's that kind of astringent bitter. And that is what's kind of holding on to the kind of earthy and the slight pine hop aromas that came through that are translating into the beer as well. Overall, I think this is an excellent IPA. I really enjoy it. It's a very interesting new hop. I'm going to keep my eyes out for any others I can find that have lotus hops in them. It's very enjoyable. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both of these beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with Modern Times Beer, this is Booming Rollers. It's a double dry hopped IPA, clocking in at 6.8%. Again, they're based out of San Diego, California. This one's 50 IBUs. It is vegan and brewed with a blend of Citra, Citra Cryo, Centennial, and Motueka hops. I'm still just guessing on the pronunciation there, so if anybody knows, do please let me know down in the comments. I want to get it right. Nonetheless, starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was fine. It wasn't super pungent, but what you did smell smelled very hop forward and very, very fresh. Just wasn't the most pronounced aroma in the world. High end of average, it gets a 6. Moving on to the taste. I enjoyed this beer. This is now the second vegan beer I've had. I'm not really sure what difference having a vegan beer, I mean, honestly, I'm having a hard time grasping at what the difference could be other than maybe different processes with the base ingredients. But nonetheless, the flavor on this was nice. It was certainly a very fresh tasting and hop forward, though for my money, and I'm sorry I'll say this about any IPA, the hop is the star and the bitters are one of the draws to the hop. And it just didn't have enough bitters, especially considering it was brewed with Citra, Citra Cryo, and Centennial, all three of which are very high alpha acid content hops. I was just wanting for more bitters. But aside from that, it was still very good. I gave it high end of average on the taste as well. It gets a 6 out of 10. For the body, this beer had a really, really nice substantive body. Especially considering only 6.8, that's kind of middle tier for an IPA, but it felt far bigger than that, far more robust. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. The mouthfeel was the exact same story as the body. This beer had a really, really nice mouthfeel to it. Textbook IPA, but with a lot more thickness, a lot more viscosity, so it had real presence around the palate. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish, despite the fact that the bitters weren't super, super pungent in this beer, the finish was still quite long. Those hop flavors that were very present, and same thing with the aromas, but they really lingered around the palate. And the bitters that it did produce, they stuck around as well. It was just not quite top tier for me, but I only docked 1 point. I give it a 9 out of 10. For the head and retention, head was great on this beer. It looked like it easily could have been poured off of a tap or even a nitro tap. It was really nice and thick and creamy and dense, and it stuck around the whole time. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance-wise, this beer was just one of those that's exactly what I picture in my head when I think of an IPA. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance. Overall, I really enjoyed the balance on this beer. Really, the only nitpicks that I had were related to bitter pungency. It wasn't hop pungency. The hop flavors were very forward and they came through quite clearly. It just didn't have enough of the bitters, enough alphas. The bitter edge was not as great as I would have liked for these high alpha acid content hops. Still thought it was above average. It gets a 7 out of 10. For the feeling and the intangible, this beer I enjoyed overall. I thought it was a very enjoyable IPA drinking experience. Only the second vegan beer I've ever had, the first vegan IPA. But for me, when you're putting in all these high alpha acid content hops, but the bitters aren't as intense as I'm anticipating and really craving an IPA, that's a big one for me. So In terms of flavor and bitter pungency and the aroma in tandem with just subdued bitters overall with these high alpha acid content hops, I did think it was above average, but it wasn't top tier. It gets a 7 out of 10. Finally, as an example of this style, I thought this was a very nice IPA. It really was delicious. Don't get me wrong, really the major gripes I had were really just in terms of pungency, both in terms of aroma and in terms of the bitter pungency with these high alpha acid content hops. I still thought it was an excellent IPA and above average overall. It gets a 7. That brings the total score on Modern Times Beer's Booming Rollers to an 82 out of 100. So this is most definitely an above average offering. If you're a fan of IPAs, I do highly recommend this one if you can get your hands on it. It was very enjoyable and a nice tall can. Moving on to beer number 2, the Venerable Anchorage Brewing Company. This is the Demon Boy Hazy IPA, clocking in slightly lower than the prior at 6.4, brewed with strictly Lotus hops, and they are of course based out of Anchorage, Alaska. Starting with the aroma on this beer was pretty much an identical story to the first beer we sampled. It smelled nice, it smelled fresh, it smelled hop forward, it just wasn't that pungent. For the same reason, it gets a 6 out of 10. For the taste, very, very enjoyable. This beer was much bigger in terms of flavor profile than the Modern Times offering. Really though, I was still craving more bitters. I don't know if Lotus hops are high alpha acid or if they just needed to add more or do a longer boil to extract them in various points in the stage. But I still felt myself craving more bitters to go along with all the delicious hop qualities that came through. But it wasn't off the mark by much. I only docked 1 point. It gets a 9 out of 10. For the body on this one was just as big as it was on the first beer. I mean, just far, far bigger than you expect for this ABV range. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same story here. It was really big and thick and viscous and was surprisingly so for the ABV of 6.4. Another perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish on this one was very, very long. The hop flavors themselves really stuck around the palate. And even though I was craving more bitters, the bitters that were present, those alphas, really did linger around the back of the palate. So it was a nice even blend of hop flavor and bitters. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this was another one that just poured absolutely beautifully. It poured beautifully, stuck around, nice, thick, creamy, dense head that stuck around the whole time. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10. Appearance, same story as with the first beer. Both of these were just absolute spot on the money for what I picture on my head when I think of an IPA. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance, overall I really enjoyed the balance on this beer. The balance between the malt bill and the hops in particular was excellent. Really the only thing I could say was balance-wise, I was craving more bitters. It wasn't off the mark by much, but I still wanted more. I docked 1 point, it gets a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. I love this beer. I did. I loved them both, and they both were excellent IPAs. This one was far more intense, which I appreciate, and really it was just the slight lack of bitters for me and just a little more pungency on the aroma to give me a better idea. I only docked 1 point here as well. It gets a 9 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, excellent IPA all around. In fact, both of these were, but specifically this Anchorage, I mean, it had a lot going for it. The hop choice was excellent. It was a very interesting hop, and I'm certainly going to keep my eyes out for these in the future. Really, it all came down to me for pungency or lack thereof. And I don't mean that, but with more than a grain of salt. It was not weak, and it wasn't weak in terms of bitters or hop forward edge. I just craved a little more bitters than what came through in this beer. Again, I only docked 1 point. I give it a 9 out of 10, which brings the total score on Anchorage Brewing Company's The Demon Boy to a 92 out of 100. So all total, we're looking at a 10-point spread, 82 versus 92, but both of these are absolutely top tier, well above average IPAs that are well worth seeking if you can get your hands on them. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you can just click the notification bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.